Welcome to the Scars of Heart channel, and invite you to watch our new video featuring our original story. Misfortune never comes alone. Nastya was sure it was just a pretty proverb, but in reality, it turned out to be a dire warning, meaning, if something terrible happens to you, be prepared for even worse to come. Her misfortunes began at the worst possible time. She had recently learned she was pregnant. On her day off, she went to Detsky Mir, wandering through various departments, looking for baby clothes. It was too early to think about shopping. She was only 6 weeks along, and she didn't know whether she was having a son or a daughter, so she simply looked at the tiny t-shirts and pants, bright toys, and elegant dresses. Nastya smiled, imagining her husband's joy. Anton was on a business trip, and she was expecting him back in 2 days. She hadn't even told her mother-in-law about her pregnancy yet. Her beloved was supposed to be the first to hear the news. She was very pleased to think about this. The girl's happy thoughts were interrupted by a call. The manager of the tailor shop where Nastya worked called. The elderly woman's voice was unusually loud, and her words were rude and unpleasant. "I've had enough," the manager declared. "What do you think? You thought you could get away with anything because you're such a wonderful specialist. You're wrong. You're fired. Come today, resign, and get your severance pay. If you don't show up, I'll fire you tomorrow." The news stunned Nastya. She had an excellent relationship with the manager. The manager valued her as the most sought-after specialist in the tailor shop. Nastya attracted the most valuable clients, who accounted for half of their business's profits. Besides Nastya, there were 9 other tailors in the shop, but none of them had such a large queue of wealthy clients as Nastya, and the guest book was mostly filled with praise for Anastasia's talent and skill, and the girl's personal relationship with the headmistress was wonderful. At least, that's how it seemed to Nastya. Margarita Vadimovna had even been deeply upset for a while about Nastya being married. She kept saying she'd always dreamed of a wife like her for her bachelor son. And then, suddenly, she was fired. Her mood soured. She didn't feel like going to the children's store anymore, and she decided to go to work and resign. It was better than being fired for cause. She walked along the sidewalk, trying to figure out why they'd asked her to resign, but she couldn't recall a single serious sin. She hadn't had any flaws in her work, hadn't argued with clients, and hadn't violated work discipline. Soon, she crossed the threshold of her beloved tailor shop and was immediately met with hostile glances from her colleagues. She said hello, but received no response. She went straight to the manager's office. "You're so ungrateful," Margarita Vadimovna snapped at her. "I treated you like a daughter. I taught you everything, gave you the best clients, paid you more than everyone else. And you thanked me like this, Margarita Vadimovna. What happened?" Nastya asked, confused, seeing how furious the usually calm and kind manager had become. "She's even asking," the manager said, throwing up her hands indignantly. "Sit down and write a resignation. I can't stand the sight of you." The girl wrote the resignation. The manager signed it and called the accounting department. She told them to pay Nastya immediately and transfer the money to her card. A few minutes later, the accountant called back and reported that she had done everything and transferred the money. "Check. The money has arrived," Margarita Vadimovna asked Nastya sternly. The girl took out her phone, and at that moment, it rang. A message had arrived about the funds being received. "Yes," Nastya answered quietly. "I received my payment. So what's the matter anyway? Why did they fire me?" "When you get home, check out the city forum, where there are reviews of all the city's tailoring shops and private tailoring workshops." The elderly woman responded, tired, and showed her the door. Nastya was eager to know the reason for her dismissal. So, leaving the tailor's shop, she walked to the nearest cafe and settled down at table. She pulled out her smartphone and searched a local forum. Finally, she found her atelier. She started reading customer reviews and was shocked. The chat was full of posts in her name, and not just any posts, but outrageous, insulting statements about the management and employees of her atelier. When she read everything, it became clear to her why she had been fired and why her colleagues had treated her so unkindly. After all, the posts posted in Nastya's name made it clear that the atelier was only making a profit thanks to her. Everyone else was doing a sloppy job, and there were practically no good specialists among them. She had to prompt everyone, correct their mistakes, and calm clients enraged by poor quality tailoring. But that wasn't all. There were other posts, reviews from Nastya's clients. They were cursing her with all sorts of words, criticizing her work. Their feedback mostly boiled down to the fact that she used to be a good specialist. I created original, beautiful designs, made the patterns myself exactly to the customer's figure, and sewed them myself with high quality and precision. But recently, Nastya had supposedly changed since then. The reviews were filled with speculation about what could have affected Nastya so much. Some wrote that she'd developed a drinking habit. Others suggested she'd simply become arrogant and therefore wasn't doing well at her job. One client even wrote that Nastya had found a rich lover, and now she didn't really need her job. But the problem was, Nastya had never registered on this forum. She'd never posted anything there. And the negative reviews about herself that Nastya had read were written by people she didn't even know. They weren't her clients. At first, Nastya was outraged by the forum's content over the past few days. She wanted to explain herself to the manager of the studio, to her colleagues, to talk to clients, but then she realized that all of this would be very painful and difficult for her. And who knew how her colleagues would react to her desire to clear her name? So she decided not to pursue any arguments with anyone. The most important thing for her now is to stay calm so as not to harm the baby. Nastya could hardly wait for Anton to arrive. He came home with a bouquet of flowers for her, but he seemed tired and distant. The girl decided he was very tired. The business trip lasted 9 days, and it was no wonder he looked so tired. She decided to tell him about the pregnancy and her problems tomorrow, when he was rested and in a good mood. That evening, her mother-in-law arrived. 60-year-old Antonina Petrovna was a gentle, affectionate woman who knew how to calm anyone who was feeling unwell. Nastya was delighted. She really wanted to tell her mother-in-law about her troubles at work and ask for advice on what to do next. After dinner, Anton excused himself and went to bed, even though it was still early, and Nastya was even happy about that. It was an opportunity to share a secret with her beloved mother-in-law. She poured Antonina Petrovna her favorite oregano tea and sat down across from her, preparing to complain about her unfair dismissal. But her mother-in-law beat her to it. She stood up, closed the kitchen door tightly, and quietly said to Nastya, "What are you doing? I got you a job at the best studio in town, and you let Margarita Vadimovna down like this, and the whole team. I don't understand what happened to you, but mutual friends are saying you've got a lover. The news must have reached Antosha too. Look. He's so distraught. Oh, come on, Antonina Petrovna." Nastya looked trustingly at her mother-in-law. "I don't have a lover, and I didn't leave any comments on the forum. I didn't write any of this." But her mother-in-law's gaze was as cold and distant as ever. The elderly woman finished her tea in silence, then stood up and, holding the doorknob, turned to Nastya. "The thing is, it wasn't just one person who told me about the lover, but 3 of our friends," the mother-in-law said mournfully. "I don't think my son needs a wife like that. He's on a business trip, and she's immediately cheating on him. Antosha will find someone better. Thank God there are still decent girls in the world." She quietly left the kitchen, and soon Nastya heard the front door slam. She was deeply offended that she was being suspected of things she hadn't done. But she couldn't figure out who needed all this. After all, she had no enemies, no rivals, who could so skillfully compromise, and he was setting her up. She decided that tomorrow morning, when Anton woke up, she would tell him everything, and together they would figure out how to resolve this unpleasantness so that everyone would know Nastya was innocent. The accusation of infidelity sounded absolutely ridiculous. Nastya and her husband were paying off the mortgage on the 2-bedroom apartment they lived in. So, she worked diligently at the tailor's shop during the day and earned extra money at home in the evenings, taking orders from clients who needed something sewn very quickly, literally in a day. This usually paid well, and Nastya never turned down the extra income. Thanks to her good income, they had paid off the mortgage early 2 months ago, and now they were saving up for a new car for her husband, and Nastya was still just as busy. Sometimes she would sit until 2:30 a.m. fulfilling urgent orders. What lovers were there? After all, she had to be at the tailor's shop at 8 a.m., and in fact, she hadn't even considered the idea of cheating. The next morning, Nastya made Anton breakfast and waited impatiently for him to wake up, but the bedroom door suddenly opened, and Anton emerged from there, wearing a suit and carrying his leather work folder where he kept his documents. "I didn't even hear you get up," Nastya said in surprise, approaching her husband. Anton gave her a cold look and said, "I won't have breakfast. They're waiting for you at work with a business trip report." Bye. Nastya felt as if she'd been doused with ice water. Anton had never spoken to her so coldly and indifferently. He didn't even ask how she was doing or kiss her on the cheek. She realized Anton already knew something about her troubles, but it was clear her husband had no intention of helping her. Nastya paced the house, replaying the events of the previous day in her head over and over again, unable to find any explanation for them. Finally, she realized she was about to go crazy. She needed to find something to occupy herself with. She'd finished the rush order the night before, so she called the client and told her the work was done and she could pick up the dress any time. The woman was very happy and said she'd be there in about 2 hours. Nastya felt a little relieved. Finally, she found someone who would talk to her. Kindly and with a smile. 2 hours later, the young and beautiful Kira crossed the threshold of Anastasia's apartment, tried on the dress she had made, was very pleased, paid for the work, and gave her half the amount, saying that it was a bonus for the dress turning out so luxurious. "Today, everyone will be delighted with me at my husband's corporate party," the client said, laughing infectiously. "All the women there are fashionable, they dress very well, but I feel that today I will be the best of the best." Nastya smiled sparingly in response, and the beautiful Kira stopped smiling, became very serious, and suddenly said, "I've heard what they say and write about you. I myself have been through the same. I shed a sea of tears when lies were spread about me, and then it turned out that some fool, in love with my husband, spread the gossip. I'm sure that someone is digging under you too. I don't believe a single word that is said about you. So, forget about everyone else, and if things get really tough, you can come to me for help. I can't do anything myself. But my husband, he's not a small man, and he'll figure something out to bring this vulture to justice." "Thank you," Nastya whispered. She was deeply touched by the concern of this barely known woman. After all, their only connection was their orders. They weren't friends or relatives, but for some reason, this woman was willing to lend Nastya a helping hand. The client left, and Anastasia felt much better. It turns out there are sensible people who don't believe the nonsense someone persistently spreads about her. Anastasia set about calling clients waiting in line to use her services. But one after another, for some reason, they all said they no longer needed a dress or a business gown tailored. Some were curt and cold, others caustic and mocking. But it was clear to Nastya that most of her clients were aware of the mess that had suddenly befallen her. After calling a few people, the girl realized that she would have a hard time getting orders from now on. That evening, Anton arrived. Anastasia was determined to talk to her husband, even if he was very tired. As Anton sat eating dinner, she approached him from behind, leaned over, and hugged him. Anton abruptly threw her hands off and turned to face her. He threw it down with irritation. "You're wrong to think you hid everything well. I know everything about you and your beloved. You have exactly 3 days to pack your things and get out of here." "Anton, what do you mean, get out?" Nastya asked quietly, shocked by her husband's words. "This is our shared apartment. We've been paying the mortgage for almost 8 years. I didn't sleep at night to pay it off as quickly as possible." But Anton only smirked arrogantly. "You seem to have forgotten that I took out the loan in my own name even before we got married. So, according to all the documents, the apartment belongs only to me. Under different circumstances, I might agree to a division of property, but not now. You've taken a lover. Now let him arrange your happy future in your shared nest. Sort it out yourselves, and forget about my apartment." Nastya barely remembered what happened next. At first, she tried to convince her husband that she didn't have a lover and had nowhere to go. Then she spoke incoherently and very briefly about the troubles that had happened at work. The girl saw that Anton wasn't listening to her well, but she couldn't stop. She wanted to convey to her loved one everything that had been troubling her for the last 2 days. But Anton was impenetrable. Not a muscle moved on his face. Even when Nastya announced her pregnancy, he only looked up at her in surprise and said, "Wow, I thought they told me everything about you." But it turns out they forgot to mention the most important thing. He looked at his wife mockingly, then lost his temper. "Nastya, well then you have nothing to worry about at all," he said cheerfully. "Knowing this isn't just a lover but your destiny. You and I didn't have children for 8 years, and as soon as I got involved with this guy, I immediately got pregnant. Then don't worry, rich people don't abandon their children. Even if he doesn't marry you, he'll throw some money at you, and you won't starve." Anastasia tried her best to convince her husband that the child was his. She offered to get examined, to take a test to make sure she was pregnant by Anton. But the man only looked at her with disdain and stubbornly refused all her offers. Finally, Anton's 3 days passed. To pack her things. Nastya's attempts to reach her husband were fruitless. He was certain the rumors and gossip about Nastya were pure truth. His mother had said the same thing, and she certainly wouldn't lie wantonly. Antonina Petrovna, however, was a little kinder to her daughter-in-law. She told her son to let Nastya live in the apartment until the divorce court ruling was received, and suggested her son move in with her in the meantime. Nastya didn't unpack her suitcases. They sat in the hallway, a reminder that nothing can ever be certain. Until recently, she'd thought life was meant for joy and happiness, but today she knew for sure that life is a series of troubles, injustice, and pain. Antonina Petrovna hustled, and through her friends, expedited the divorce hearing. Nastya and Anton were divorced 3 weeks after filing the petition with the local legislature. The property was not divided. According to the documents presented to the court, all marital property was owned by Anton and had been acquired by him before the marriage. Nastya's lawyer's timid attempts to prove that more than half of the mortgage was covered by Anastasia's earnings were dismissed by the court, as Nastya simply handed over her salary to her husband, who allegedly repaid the loan with his own funds. As a distraught Nastya left the courtroom after the verdict was announced, a satisfied Anton was waiting for her at the exit. He gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry if your lover doesn't help. You have a house in the village. People live in villages too, and I think that's where you belong." Nastya left the courthouse devastated. Something had to be done. Anton gave her 3 more days to completely pack her things and vacate the apartment. Nastya decided to quickly find a position at any tailor shop in the city. She wasn't afraid of work, and was confident she could quickly return to her previous level and earn a decent income. But it turned out that her fame had already spread throughout the tailor shops. She was rejected everywhere she applied. She had nowhere to live, and nothing to live on. She had about 100,000 rubles in her personal bank account. This would have been enough to pay 3 months' rent in the city. And then what? The money was rapidly dwindling, and the girl realized she had no choice but to head to the village. At least there was a house there. She needed to get it in order for the baby's arrival and find some way to earn some money. Nastya sorted through her things one last time, took the bare essentials, and slammed the door of her husband's apartment behind her. From that moment on, she could only rely on herself. Nastya took a seat by the window and turned away from her fellow passengers. She didn't feel like talking to anyone. For the 100th time, she tried to understand why her life had changed so drastically overnight. What had gone wrong? Where had she gone wrong? Why had she had no one to lean on in her difficult time? There were so many questions, but not a single answer. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that her fate must have been so unfortunate. Her grandmother's words came vividly to mind. She often repeated to Nastya that women in their family were born very beautiful, but unhappy. Grandmother stroked Nastya's head. Wrinkled hands slid over the girl's smooth, shiny hair, shimmering with gold, and the grandmother, with tears in her eyes, prophesied, "I'm afraid that you, Nastyusha, won't be able to become happy either. There is too much evil and envy in the world, and you are very much like your mother. Just as beautiful, kind, unrequited, trusting, evil people will torment you. They will not spare you. And you, do not wish evil on anyone, and do not blame anyone for anything. This is our fate. Be strong, granddaughter. Be strong and never think of repeating what your mother did." Nastya always remembered her grandmother with great warmth. She was the closest person in the world to her. Nastya remembered well her grandmother's terrible stories about her mother. The old woman often repeated to her granddaughter that when she saw her daughter Masha off to the city, she prayed that everything would work out for her. At first it seemed that the old woman's prayers were answered. Masha got a job at a private veterinary clinic, where she was paid well, rented a small room in a dorm, and then met a guy, a computer scientist. She fell head over heels in love with him, and he fell in love with her too. He proposed to her. And when Masha went to meet his parents, she learned that the guy wasn't a computer guy at all, but the son of very wealthy parents, and he deliberately lied to her about computers. He was looking for a selfless girl who would love him, not his rich inheritance, since he was the only son of a banker. At the viewing, Masha was very confused. The young girl was stunned by the luxury of the mansion to which Andrei brought her. But the guy's father, banker Posnyakov, received his son's bride very warmly and in a family-like manner. He liked Maria's beauty and modesty. It was exactly the kind of wife he'd once dreamed of. But it didn't work out. He was forced to marry the banker's daughter, who fell in love with him, and the father himself proposed to the guy, as he needed someone to pass on his business, his bank. So Andrei's father married the bank rather than his wife Sofia. Even in her youth, she wasn't particularly attractive, and by the age of 10, in addition to the age-related changes, a persistent expression of discontent, malicious arrogance, and envy had appeared on her face. Andrei's mother, Sofia Arkadyevna, was anything but. She was an unkind person, and made no secret of it. On the day she met her son's fiancé, she eyed the girl appraisingly and winced. Sofia Arkadyevna was a woman of the highest order. It was obvious she was a regular at beauty salons. Her clothes were very expensive. Her stunning jewelry was captivating. However, Masha looked far more striking in comparison. A shock of golden hair, full scarlet lips, and a cheerful sparkle in her radiant blue eyes. Sofia Arkadyevna couldn't allow such a striking beauty to enter their family. The elderly lady knew she would always lose out to her daughter-in-law, and once she dressed Masha appropriately for her status, no one would even glance at her. Sofia Arkadyevna couldn't immediately tell her beloved son that she didn't like the bride. She pretended to accept Andrei's choice and even planned a shopping trip with the bride. After learning that Andrei's parents had given their approval for the wedding, Maria relaxed and began allowing the groom to occasionally spend the night in her dorm room. The wedding day approached, and with it the due date was quickly approaching. Maria was pregnant, and she and Andrei eagerly awaited the arrival of their first child. Andrei dreamed of having a girl like Masha, while the expectant mother desperately wanted a boy who would look like her beloved Andrei. 2 weeks before the wedding, the couple decided to tell Sofia Arkadyevna of the pregnancy. She greeted the news with hostility, declaring that such things weren't customary in good families. Children shouldn't be born until at least 9 months after marriage. After the announcement, the future mother-in-law no longer concealed her hostility toward Masha. She scolded her for any reason. Sometimes Maria's eye makeup was unflattering, sometimes her blouse was too flashy, or her laughter was too loud. Sofia Arkadyevna always found something to criticize. Meanwhile, the banker Poznyakov and the girl's fiancé tried their best to reassure Maria. Andrei's father said he'd already prepared a house for the newlyweds, and as soon as they got married, they'd move into their own place. Sofia Arkadyevna wouldn't bother them there. A week before the wedding, Maria's dorm, the Poznyakov family's housekeeper, appeared. She was carrying a large bag. The elderly housekeeper looked at Masha with sympathy and said, "Mashenka, I'm very sorry, but the young master asked me to tell you that your wedding will not take place. Andrei is urgently leaving abroad. His fiancée is there. He asked me to give you the things in the bag, and this too." The housekeeper pulled a heavy envelope from her purse, and Masha realized that it contained money. "It can't be," the girl was amazed. "We're having a baby soon. I'll call him now." "No need, Mashenka." The housekeeper shook her head sadly. "He's already at the airport, probably already checked in for the flight. And if he were free, he would have come to you himself. He sent me because he has no time." The housekeeper said goodbye and left, and a confused Maria began to think about what to do next. The baby was supposed to be born in 5 months. She already knew it would be a girl. She and Andrei had even come up with a name for her: Nastya. Maria was devastated. She knew she urgently needed support. But the whole world, there were only 2 people she counted on as much as she counted on herself: Andrei and her mother. Andrei betrayed her, which meant that only her mother remained. Masha bought a ticket and went to the village. She was very surprised and delighted when her mother accepted the news of the pregnancy calmly and joyfully, without scolding or reproaching, but simply hugged the girl and said, "It's okay, Mashenka. We'll raise a beautiful and smart girl together, and don't be upset because of your fiancé. Happiness will definitely come to you. You're such a good girl." In May, Nastya was born. Her mother and grandmother couldn't be happier about her, and in August, Maria got her hands on a beautiful thick magazine, and in it, on one of the spreads, she saw a photo of the Poznyakov family. Her fiancé, Andrei, smiled happily, standing next to his haughty mother. There was no foreign wife in the photo, and Masha decided that the fiancé had simply lied to her about going abroad. He simply wanted to get rid of her. He was fed up with her. Maria couldn't bear it. He had simply betrayed her and their child. And when the grandmother brought her tiny granddaughter home from a walk, she immediately realized something irreparable had happened. So, at 3 months old, Nastya was left without a mother or father, living only with her grandmother in an old country house on the outskirts of a dying village. When Nastya turned 15, she heard her grandmother tell her for the first time that she would suffer for the rest of her life. The girl didn't understand her grandmother's words and, looking sadly at her granddaughter, explained, "That's what people say. If a person is born in May, it's written in their destiny. He'll suffer all his life. Fate will be unkind to him. Nastya just laughed at the time. She and her grandmother lived in a small, quiet village, and everything was fine with them. At least that's what the girls thought then. Of course, she was very sorry that her mother died very early, and she didn't remember her at all. And the girl didn't know her father either. But for her, he was something like a fairy tale hero, unreal and unkind. Her grandmother raised the girl alone. Nastya was an excellent student. There was no school in their village, but there were 6 other students in the village besides her, and every morning a school bus would pick them up and take them to a town 12 km away. There was a large school there. After lunch, the children were brought back to the village. The people here were friendly and kind, and Nastya grew up in an atmosphere of complete trust. True, everyone lived in poverty. The adults went to work in a neighboring town, but Nastya and her grandmother lived on 2 pensions and what they could sell from their garden to visitors who occasionally stopped by their village for milk and eggs. After 9th grade, Nastya trained as a seamstress and pattern maker in a neighboring town and left for the capital. Her grandmother insisted, saying Nastya wouldn't find a good job anywhere nearby. There, Nastya met Anton, married him, became pregnant by the age of 28, and was sure that life was improving, and that only happiness awaited her and her husband. But no, these were empty dreams. Nastya bitterly realized that she was repeating her mother's fate. She, too, turned out to be useless and devoted. However, Anastasia was firmly convinced that she wouldn't do what her poor mother had done. She wouldn't abandon her little one to his fate. She would do everything to make her son happy, especially since she was all alone with her child. After all, her elderly grandmother had died 8 years ago, in that very same old house where they once lived with their grandmother, and now Nastya was traveling by train. The wheels of the train, carrying Nastya further and further south from the capital, clattered indifferently. No one in the world cared about the unfortunate pregnant woman who had decided to live in defiance of everything, and even dared to dream of happiness for her son. However, she couldn't see anything definite in the future. Nastya hadn't been in the village for many years. Since then, the village had become even smaller. Now only old people lived there. Yes, sometimes the owners of abandoned houses came for vacation in the summer. This didn't bother Nastya at all. She had already found herself a remote job. The pay wasn't particularly generous, but it was enough for Nastya to live on, especially since her needs were very modest. As soon as Nastya got home, she tidied up the rooms. The day of her due date was approaching, and she made sure she had everything she needed by the time she returned from the hospital. True, she didn't have time to completely restore the house and yard to a divine state. The cold weather set in, and with a big belly, you can't do much work. She decided to give birth and then see how things go. In November, a large, loud-voiced baby was born. Despite his size, the birth was easy, and Nastya was discharged home on the 3rd day. She named the baby Andrei, after the father she never knew. The baby grew up calm and healthy, causing his mother no trouble, and Anastasia was delighted. She spent a lot of time at the computer, managing to put something aside from every payment. She planned to expand the baby's wardrobe in the summer, as he was growing so quickly. When all the snow melted in the yard, she began to collect the perennial debris in a pile. She needed to clear the ground for spring planting. When the ground was ready, but it was still too early to plant, she finally got around to the cluttered attic. It was the most unpleasant place in the house. The attic was filled with piles of unwanted old things, half-broken furniture, dented basins and buckets, random clothes and pillows. It took 2 days to dump all this junk downstairs and gather it into a pile, some of it to be taken to the trash bin later, and some of it just to be burned. Finally, all that was left for Nastya to do was clear it out. The only clutter in the attic were the corners. There were bundles of old books and newspapers, some boxes and broken chests. And suddenly, among these boxes, Nastya stumbled upon a large carved box, very sturdy and beautiful. This thing clearly stood out among the cheap old junk. It was not only beautiful, but also very expensive. This was clear from the skillful carving. The lid of the box depicted an ancient village. Young ladies in beautiful dresses surrounded a clearing, in the center of which a tame bear danced. The carving was many years old. Even Nastya could tell, although she didn't really understand such things. Nastya dusted the box and peered inside curiously. It contained old postcards and letters, and at the very bottom lay a small notebook. Nastya began leafing through it and realized it was a diary, handwritten by her grandmother. At the very bottom of the box, she discovered a large ring set with a red stone. The ring's striking feature was the stone's color, though the setting was also quite interesting. It must have been crafted by ancient craftsmen. Downstairs, little Andreyushka began to cry, and Nastya quickly descended from the attic. The girl had no worries with her son. When the little one was well fed and dry, he would curiously examine the toys hanging above his crib and listen attentively to his mother's voice as she told him of the brilliant future he would have as an adult. It seemed the baby understood and remembered everything. Nastya laughed joyfully at the baby and took him outside more and more often. Everything in the yard was blooming, fragrant, exuding freshness and delicate aromas. Summer was approaching. Living in the village was a joy. That evening, after putting her son to bed, Nastya sat down to sort through the contents of the jewelry box. Now she wanted to carefully review everything, reread it, and get rid of unnecessary items. She planned to wash the box and the ring, clean them of centuries of dirt, and try to pawn them. She was confident she could get at least a small amount of money for them. She finished the postcards and letters quickly, finding nothing of interest. But the contents of her grandmother's diary left her perplexed and awestruck. It turned out that, in life, her grandmother told her very little of what had befallen her unfortunate daughter Maria, Nastya's mother. After reading her grandmother's diary to the end, Nastya realized she would never forgive those who had driven her mother to this state. She would deal with them all. Everyone would get what they deserved, no matter the cost. From the same diary, the girl learned another very important piece of news. The box and ring must be worth a huge amount of money. Grandmother wrote that the box had been given to her great-grandmother as a token of gratitude from a wealthy princess, whom her great-grandmother had sheltered during the revolution. But the ring had a completely different story, one that Nastya didn't quite believe was credible. Grandmother's diary stated that this seemingly plain piece of jewelry had been given to Masha by her fiancé, Andrei, who said it was an antique ring in their family, passed down to the wife of the eldest son. But the value of the box and ring was quite opportune. Nastya would really need the money to see her plan through. No, she had no intention of harming or cruelly punishing anyone. She simply wanted to look everyone in the eye. To those who had driven her mother to her death, and to tell them they were completely. And of course, she was going to find out all the details of how it all happened. A few more months passed. One evening, Nastya counted all the money in her wallet, on her card, plus the money she had received that day for the jewelry box she had pawned at the city pawn shop, and came to the conclusion that she could now go to the regional center, where the banker Pozniakov's family lived. She set out to find the people she believed responsible for her mother's death. The list was drawn up quite precisely. Her would-be mother-in-law, Sofia Arkadyevna, her wayward son, Andrei, who was Nastya's father, the deceitful housekeeper who brought her mother's bag and money, and a couple more people Nastya's grandmother had mentioned in an old diary. The time spent in the village had given Nastya more than enough time to think through every detail and not miss a thing. So, as soon as she arrived in the right city, The girl immediately rented an inexpensive one-room apartment, found a nanny who would look after the child while she was away, and set about implementing her plan. The Pozniakov family still lived in the same mansion where Nastya's mother, Maria, had once met her fiancé's parents. More precisely, only the Pozniakovs lived there, her father, Ivan Olegovich, and her mother, Sofia Arkadyevna. The elder Pozniakov had long since retired from business and handed over his bank to his son, Andrei. He lived separately from his parents. Nastya quickly found the mansion and watched from a distance as people occasionally entered or left. When an elderly woman with a basket emerged from the gate, Anastasia assumed it was one of the servants and decided to talk to her. It turned out to be a maid. Sofia Arkadyevna had sent her to a beauty salon where they had customized a personalized hand lotion for her. Nastya was delighted to see the talkative maid and offered to accompany her. "Oh, I'm having such a problem," Nastya began. "Maybe you could help me? I'm looking for a job. I'm completely broke, and soon I need to pay the rent. Maybe you can tell me who needs workers around here? I'm ready for anything. I can wash floors, work in the garden. I can even hang wallpaper." "Oh no," the talkative woman responded. "Maid, all the local rich people you call them, they find them through recruiting agencies. They don't hire people off the street. But I can recommend one place to you. Just don't refer to me. Say you heard about it from someone at the bus stop. Do you agree?" Of course, Anastasia said happily. She really wanted to find a job in this cottage community, to be closer to the Pozniakovs' house and gather as much information about them as possible. "Well, listen," the elderly maid said, lowering her voice. "I work in the house of a former banker, and his wife, Sofia Arkadyevna, has been completely blind for 12 years. Is she blind or something?" the girl asked in surprise. "Blind," the maid confirmed. "I can't say anything for sure. When I came to their house, she could no longer see. But I think the servants say she has a complication from some foreign disease. She caught it somewhere in Africa, and when she came home, the disease was cured, but the complications remained." "But they are bankers," Nastya continued, innocently surprised. "Can't they find the money for treatment?" "Yes, they have the money," the maid replied. "It's something else. The mistress has a weak heart. The doctors won't perform the surgery, afraid she won't survive it." The maid told Anastasia in detail how Sofia Arkadyevna's unenviable condition has driven her to the point where no one can stand being around her for more than 2 weeks. Not only is her mistress extremely capricious, but she's also rude, insulting and harassing her co-workers. She might even hit someone if she feels someone is standing nearby. The maid informed Nastya that Sofia Arkadyevna's latest personal assistant is leaving in a day. She's a cross between a nurse and a secretary. The manager is scrambling to find someone to fill the vacancy, but everyone has heard about Sofia Arkadyevna's nasty personality, and no one wants to work for her. Perhaps you'll take the job? The maid looked at Anastasia with a slight mockery, believing that after such a story, the girl would hardly want to work for her mistress. "Well," Nastya suddenly said, "well, I have no choice. I told you, I'll be glad to have any work." The maid was glad that she had found a servant for her mistress. Otherwise, she would have had to look after her herself until they found someone the right person. She said that Nastya could go to the house right now, ask the owners, and offer herself for the job. She asked again that Nastya not mention the conversation with her. A few minutes later, Anastasia was standing at the gate of the house. She thought everything would go smoothly and quickly, but while she waited for them to open the gate for her heart was pounding, because she was standing not in front of just any house, but in front of her grandparents' home. She was terrified and anxious. She didn't know how they would receive her there, and she was very afraid of giving herself away in any way, As soon as the owners were informed about the arrival of a young woman looking for work and willing to work at any level, the owner asked to see her. The former banker, Pozniakov, had put on weight in the intervening time. He was well over 70. He looked good, but his face was terribly tired, and his eyes were sad. Sad, Naswite, my dear. What kind of job do you dream of? Ivan Olegovich asked Nastya, settling into the chair opposite her. To be honest, any job would suit me, but the one that pays better would be better, Nastya said, playing the role of an incredible simpleton from the provinces. They told me at the bus stop that I have a sick grandmother. They say she can't see, and that's why it's difficult to work with her, but that doesn't scare me. I'm kind and patient. Ivan Olegovich looked at the young woman with a slight smile and suddenly asked, "Has anyone ever told you that you look a lot like an actress? I just can't remember which one." "No, what are you saying? I've never heard anything like that," said Nastya. "Well, what about work?" Ivan Olegovich smiled sadly and said, "Life is such a tricky thing, and everything would be fine. But the only bad thing is that we begin to realize our mistakes only at an age when nothing can be corrected." "What are you talking about?" asked Nastya. And then Ivan Olegovich seemed to break down. He began to tell the girl that his wife was unbearable. She torments anyone who is near her for more than 5 minutes. The elderly man blamed both Sofia Arkadyevna and himself for this. He lamented that while he was working, he devoted all his attention to his work and was only vaguely interested in family affairs. And so it turned out that his son had lost his true love. Mashenka had disappeared from his life, as if she had never existed. Andrei then searched for his bride, but never found her. He suffered greatly. Ivan Olegovich tried his best to help his son, hired the best detectives, spared no expense, but no one managed to find Maria. Anastasia listened to her grandfather's confession with tears in her eyes. "You see," Ivan Olegovich winced. "You are a complete stranger, and yet you were moved to tears. And can you imagine what my son felt when his bride disappeared?" "And where did she go?" asked Nastya. "The detectives I hired said that most likely she is not alive, otherwise they would have somehow found her trail. But she was also pregnant when she disappeared. We found out nothing about the fate of the child. Andriusha was young then, but he was completely imprisoned." Nastya's heart was relieved. Now she knew for sure that her biological father was not involved in her mother's death, and that was already good. Ivan Olegovich continued to complain about his fate and feel sorry for his son. He said that Andrei had suffered 2 severe blows. The first was when the pregnant Maria disappeared, and the second was when he learned that this mother had tried to separate them and sent him to a housekeeper came to the dormitory and told Masha that her fiancé had gone abroad because his fiancée was waiting for him there. The housekeeper told Andrei this when she quit her job. The entire time she worked for the Pozniakov family, she was haunted by what she had done. After all, when she told Masha about her fiancé, that he was already at the airport and ready to fly to his fiancée, she saw clearly what was happening to the girl and understood that she was ruining her life. But she couldn't disobey her employer. Andrei, having heard the housekeeper's confession, simply cut his mother out of his life. Many years have passed since then, but his son has never congratulated his mother on a single holiday, never called her, or even answered her calls. For him, his mother simply died. A sad story. Nastya Poznikova sympathized. But it seems to me that your son, although cruel to his mother, deserved it. Ivan Olegovich looked sternly at the girl and said, "Yes, and I am good. Masha was wonderful, but I saw that Sonia didn't like her. I should have protected her, but nothing didn't do it. I thought that after the wedding the young couple would start living their own family, and my Sophia simply wouldn't be able to reach them. She wouldn't ruin their lives. That's how it turned out. It's not your fault." The girl warmly supported him. You didn't know what your wife was capable of. I didn't know, the man confirmed. But the feeling of guilt towards Masha and towards my son oppresses me. Nastya was glad once again. It turns out that her grandfather is a completely normal person. He didn't wish her mother any harm. On the contrary, he tried to help as best he could. He bought a separate house so that his mother-in-law wouldn't interfere with the young family. That's a lot. Well, haven't I scared you with my stories about my wife? Ivan Olegovich asked. Since I haven't scared you, let's go get acquainted. A few minutes later, they entered Sofia Arkadyevna's large, bright, and very cozy room. The woman heard footsteps and tensed. Vanya, who did you bring? Anastasia heard a sharp, capricious voice for the first time. My own grandmother. I didn't invite anyone. Calm down, Sonia, calm down, the elderly man said wearily. This is a girl who wants to work as your assistant. Talk to her for 5 minutes. If you decide to take her, tomorrow she'll be back to work. How old are you? Sofia Arkadyev asked discontentedly, looking into space. 30, answered Nastya. My granddaughter is also 30 now, Sofia Arkadyevna informed in a dejected voice. And what's your name? Nastya, the girl answered. What a coincidence, said the blind woman. They were going to name my granddaughter Nastenka too, but I don't know if she was born. Sofia Arkadyevna descended into her memories, but they were incomprehensible. Half erased from memory, she spoke incoherently, snatching unconnected pieces of memory from the past. But they all revolved around Maria and Andrei, Nastya's parents. The girl looked at her grandmother and did not feel the slightest pity for her. She could tell her right then and there everything she thought about her. Oh no, Nastya wanted to find the cruelest, most accusatory and offensive words for this woman. Sofia Arkadyevna finally fell silent, and after a short pause, agreed to accept Nastya as her assistant. Ivan Olegovich took the girl away to tell her about his wife's needs and discuss the terms of employment. Upon learning that Nastya was renting an apartment, Ivan Olegovich offered her a room in the guest house located on the grounds surrounding the mansion. All the staff working in the elderly woman's home lived there. When Nastya mentioned that she had a small child and a nanny looked after him during the day, Ivan Olegovich allowed her to live with the baby and promised to allow the nanny into the house while Nastya worked with her landlady. Anastasia began work the next day. She quickly settled into her new home and new responsibilities. The housekeeper who had told her about the job kept coming to Nastya to find out if her landlady was bothering her with her whims. But Nastya had nothing to complain about. Her landlady was simply wonderful. Sofia Arkadyevna didn't reprimand her for mistakes or delays when the slow cook in the kitchen couldn't keep up with the housewife's custom order. Nastya had been working for Sofia Arkadyevna for a month now. She spent her evenings with her son, and during the day she hatched plans and prepared rigorous meals. Phrases that would make her evil grandmother remember what she had done and regret her own cruelty and injustice for the rest of her life. Over the past 2 weeks, Sofia Arkadyevna had even become quieter and more reserved in her speech. Soon, all the servants in the house noticed this. Everyone noticed such a change in the woman's behavior, even Ivan Olegovich. One evening, when Nastya was preparing Sofia Arkadyevna for dinner, the man came into the room and asked his wife Sonia, "How do you like the new assistant? Are you going to keep her or find someone else? You've had her for over a month. Aren't you tired of her?" He winked at Anastasia. "You don't need to look for anyone else," the blind woman replied. She paused for a moment, as if listening to something, and then suddenly stunned her husband. "Vanya, I've finally decided to have the operation. I want it done as soon as possible." Ivan Olegovich began to object decisively. He said the surgery should have been done 10 years ago, when her body was stronger, but in recent years, the woman's heart had become very weak. Now, surgery was out of the question. Doctors categorically refused. They recommended surgery, fearing an unfavorable outcome. "Don't argue, Vanya," the older man's wife interrupted decisively. "I've made my decision. You'll talk to the doctors tomorrow to schedule the surgery. I'll sign any document stating that I'm solely responsible for everything." Ivan Olegovich was shocked by his wife's decision, as she had already gotten used to living without sight and had repeatedly said it didn't bother her. A person can adapt to anything. Where did this sudden desire come from? But Sofia Arkadyevna didn't want to explain anything to anyone. Another week passed, and Sofia Arkadyevna began preparing for the surgery. The doctors promised to restore at least 60% of her vision. That is, she would be able to see very well with glasses, but only if she recovered from anesthesia and if her heart didn't fail her. Sofia Arkadyevna was firmly convinced that the surgery would be successful. She spoke of this so decisively that even the skeptical doctors began to believe in a favorable outcome. But Ivan Olegovich could not understand his wife's desire. A week before the surgery, Sofia Arkadyevna was hospitalized to at least partially prepare her heart for the upcoming surgical procedure. Ivan Olegovich paid Nastya vacation pay for his wife's absence and asked her not to leave. After all, after the surgery, his wife wanted only Nastya by her side. They even doubled their salaries, just to keep her from seducing her by accepting a higher-paying or more secure job outside their mansion. Nastya didn't object. She earned a good living at her grandparents' house, and the money would be very useful upon her return to the village. One thing remained unfulfilled. She still hadn't seen her father. Andrei remained angry with his mother, hadn't forgiven her for what she did to Masha, and refused to visit his parents' house. Even when Ivan Olegovich called his son and asked him to come because his mother was going through an operation she might not survive, Andrei refused to visit the elderly woman. Once again he told his father that he had no mother, because a mother would never act the way Sofia Arkadyevna did with her son and his pregnant bride. Anastasia couldn't find her father's address, even to see him from a distance. Today was the day of the operation. An hour before, Ivan Olegovich and Nastya came to Sofia Arkadyevna's room. They chatted about trivial matters, after which the blind woman asked Anastasia to leave the room. Left alone with her husband, she asked in a mysterious tone, "Vanya, did you know that when a person loses sight, all their other senses become heightened? Smell, hearing, tactile sensations?" Of course, the older man agreed. That's how it should be. "How slow you are, Vanya," his wife said with a grin. But then a nurse entered and asked the strangers to leave. They were about to change the woman for the operating room. Ivan Olegovich didn't understand his wife's remark, and then forgot about her altogether. As Sofia Arkadyevna had predicted, the operation was a success. The doctors didn't know whether to be more happy or surprised, because the old lady's heart was pretty worn out, and they couldn't find any explanation for how it could withstand such a serious 3-hour load. A week later, the doctors announced to Ivan Olegovich that they were discharging his wife home. He, in turn, reminded Nastya that she needed to return to work. 2 weeks had already passed since the surgery. Sofia Arkadyevna was recovering quickly. She could see clearly with her glasses and even tried to read, but the doctors had not yet recommended straining her eyes too much. The elderly woman had changed dramatically after the surgery. It was as if she had gained a second wind. No one, including Ivan Olegovich, could explain this. Sofia Arkadyevna walked a lot, strolled in the yard and park of her cottage community, chatted pleasantly with neighbors she had previously hated fiercely, and sincerely admired their children and pets, which had irritated her to death just a couple of months earlier. The woman enjoyed sunny days and beautiful flowers. All this was so unlike Sofia Arkadyevna that Ivan Olegovich became seriously concerned for his wife. One evening, as she was walking down the stairs after work and heading to the servants' quarters, Nastya froze on the steps. She heard Ivan Olegovich talking to his son. Holding his breath, the girl listened intently. "Andriusha, I beg you, be magnanimous," the elderly man pleaded with his son. "I am in no way excusing your mother for what she did, but forgive her. Finally, I think she's gone mad. Or maybe she's just feeling her death throes. She's completely out of her mind. This isn't her. This is her pathetic, completely unlike her. Maybe your visit will change something. Can you imagine what will happen if she ends up in a mental institution?" It turned out that Ivan Olegovich was speaking on speakerphone. Nastya heard the firm, decisive voice of her own father. "Dad, I don't care about that woman. You're always welcome. My home is open to you. But she simply doesn't exist for me. Forgive me." Nastya stood on the stairs. Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't want to cry, so she gasped for air, trying to calm down. From her father's words, she realized he loved her mother very much, since he still couldn't forgive his own. Nastya gloated. She felt the same way about Sofia Arkadyevna as her father. The girl waited until the footsteps faded. Ivan Olegovich, and ran to her room to relieve the nanny and finally spend some time with little Andriushka. Nastya wasn't the only one who overheard Ivan Olegovich's conversation with his son Andrei. Sofia Arkadyevna was about to go down to the garden for some fresh air before bed. She, too, witnessed the unpleasant conversation between her husband and son. When her husband left and his footsteps faded, the woman returned to her room and sent her son a short 4-word message. Her husband was appealing to high feelings and nobility. She, Andrei's mother, who had done as she pleased her whole life, could afford much more. Everyone only thought Sofia Arkadyevna had changed after the operation. No, she remained the same, strong, self-confident, decisive, and a woman who walked over others. Now she expected a little applause. Deep down, she was sure she deserved it. But how could she? She underwent a risky operation to prove she was right. Doesn't that deserve the admiration and gratitude of those around her? Sofia Arkadyevna called the cook, who was about to retire, and asked him to return to the mansion immediately to set a light festive table with champagne. Then she called Anastasia and said she needed her help. Nastya was at a loss, as she had already dismissed the nanny and had nowhere to put the baby. But Sofia Arkadyevna generously declared that she wouldn't disturb the boys and would play alongside them. Nastya had no choice but to return to the master's house. The girl immediately went to Sofia Arkadyevna's room, but no one was there. At that moment, the elderly woman was in her husband's bedroom. "Vanya, aren't you getting ready to go to bed?" She looked mockingly at the elderly man. "Come on, put on a decent shirt and pants. Our son is coming to visit us." Ivan Olegovich looked at the woman in horror. He decided she had completely lost her mind. After all, 15 minutes ago, Andrei had clearly told him that he would never come to this house as long as his mother was alive. His son would never come here. But to avoid upsetting his wife even more, Ivan Olegovich got dressed and obediently followed his wife. In the living room, the cook was just finishing setting the table: champagne, whiskey, appetizers, delicacies, and fruit. "Chauffeur Adievna, what else would you like?" The cook asked obsequiously, afraid to inadvertently irritate the unpredictable hostess. "Call the maid, let her pick some flowers and place them in vases throughout the living room," the hostess ordered. The cook immediately fulfilled her wish. Within 15 minutes, the room was awash in beautiful bouquets, placed everywhere imaginable. Those gathered in the living room exchanged anxious glances, unsure what to expect from the hostess next. It seemed Ivan Olegovich was in the worst shape of all. He alternately turned pale and clutched his heart. Today, his wife was especially unlike herself, Footsteps sounded on the stairs leading from the first floor of the mansion to the living room. The elderly couple's son Andrei entered the room. None of the servants knew him. The cook, the maid, and Nastya had begun working in a house he hadn't visited in ages, so Sofia Arkadyevna felt it her duty to introduce them. She looked at her son with a smile and said, "Well, son, it's time to make peace. Meet our cook Vadim, our maid Galina Petrovna, my assistant Nastya." When she introduced Nastya and Andrei looked at her, it seemed to everyone that the man could barely stand on his feet. "Nastya," the guest asked again. "And what is your last name?" "Makarova." The girl said the last name she never changed after her divorce from her husband. At that moment, Nastya realized that it was her father in front of her. She recognized him by the excitement the man felt when looking at her. After all, everyone who knew Nastya's mother said that Nastya was her mother's spitting image. "And what is your mother's last name?" Andrei guessed to ask. "Karpova?" Nastya answered. Andrei sank into a chair, exhausted. Only then did Ivan Olegovich begin to understand what was happening before his eyes. He realized that Nastya, his granddaughter, the daughter of the missing Maria, also felt ill, and only Sofia Arkadyevna smiled proudly. And beamed with a happy smile. She had recently sent her son a text message in which she wrote, "I found your daughter." And it wasn't for nothing that she asked her husband if he knew that the blind's hearing sharpens. Before the operation, she had clearly heard Nastya's voice held the same notes as her son's fiancée, Maria. But she was still afraid she might be mistaken and wanted to see clearly, to be sure that Maria and Andrei's daughter had appeared in their home. The maid rushed to get the heart drops, and soon the smell of medicine floated through the room. But now, everyone seemed a little calmer. Andrei looked at his daughter with delight. He would have recognized her even in a crowd on the street. She was the spitting image of his beloved Masha. "Where's Mom?" he asked, picking Nastya up. "Mom's not here," the girl answered sadly, turning away from Sofia Arkadyevna. Nastya felt that this man was out of place here. She really wanted to talk to her father, to be alone with him. Neither Ivan Olegovich nor Cernichnoi, the cook, were bothering her. But she didn't want Sofia Arkadyevna here. She couldn't talk about her mother in front of her. And Andrei understood this. He hugged his daughter and said, "Let's go home." Nastya scooped up her son. Her father immediately took the baby, looking joyfully into his eyes, and drove them home, into a house that will now become their real parental home.